Today, now we're on to our series called Hope. We're in this series for 7 weeks. This is week 3. I love this series. Who can't use more hope? And not a false hope, not a pie in the sky hope, but the hope that we started off with on Easter, talking about the resurrection. That's where our hope comes from. But we're now talking about 7 factors that people that are filled with hope, that are hopeful, and we all know people that are more hopeful than others, but I would say if you would watch people in your life, you'd say, man, that person is a person that seems they're filled with hope, they're hopeful. You're going to see these 7 factors that we're talking about built into their lives. Week 1 of the 7 factors was to recharge your batteries. No one drives a car on empty. You don't run, my electric mower, you don't run it on an empty battery very well, and no one lives their life very well when they're running on empty. Part of what you're doing today is recharging your spiritual batteries. You're coming to church, I don't think, to be discouraged. I think you're coming today because you want to be lifted up and you want to be encouraged, and I believe we have good news to share. The second week, we talked about raising your expectations. And people that are hopeful, they have expectations. They haven't settled and just said, it's no use anymore. I love the conversations that come from each week. And I love the honest conversations. And I had someone, part of our church, say, hey, I came across something and I thought, I've been thinking about it all week. And you probably can find anything you want to on Google to support whatever you want to think or say. And they said they came across a study that showed that only 2% of people have the ability to change. That means 98% of us, there's not much hope for. We're pretty much stuck where we are. But I began to think about that, and I was thinking about that. I don't like that, but I thought, you know what? That makes sense if you're thinking humanly speaking. If you think about it from human speaking, maybe that percentage is even lower. But if you think about it this way, 3 weeks ago we celebrate on Easter, the resurrection. You think about, humanly speaking, a person that is dead for 3 days. Humanly speaking, no one's going to have the hope to raise that person from the dead. But that's what we celebrate, the hope that we have in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That it wasn't human that did that. It was the Spirit of God that raised Jesus from the dead. And I love the scripture that says the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead lives in us, lives in the believer. So if you're living, you receive Christ as your Savior, the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead lives in you. That's power. That's powerful. That's where our hope comes from. Our hope doesn't come from our human pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps and making it happen. Our hope comes from the power of the resurrection. And if God raised Jesus from the dead, we have the hope He's going to raise us from the dead one day too and live eternally with Him. That's where our hope is. And so I just wanted to start that off to where it's not a self-help type messages. Our power comes from the resurrection of Jesus Christ and what He's done for us. Today is about refocusing on the future, though. These are things that people build into their lives to raise their level of hope. And when you raise your level of hope, then you raise your level of hope, joy. You raise your level of thinking of what could happen and what could be. I was thinking about, back to my childhood, I was thinking about some of the great teachers I had. Mrs. Jacoby, kindergarten, 2 years. How blessed was she, huh? Mrs. Weber, Mrs. Irwin, Mrs. Greenberg, Mr. Young. These were teachers. I can remember you probably can remember all your elementary teachers too. They made such an impact on my life. And the teachers I mentioned to you, they did something for me. For a young kid that you remember, those of you who know me well know that I was the kid who was the pastor's son, along with the music pastor's son, that we took rocks in the church parking lot and we knocked out every single window in the church bus. That's the kid. And so I was filled with hope from these teachers who didn't look at me for the person I was, but for the person I could become. Even my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Jacoby, saw me not for what I was, but saw me for what I could be. I had one teacher, I will not mention her by name because we have the internet today. I wouldn't want anyone to be discouraged, but I had one teacher that treated me like the idiot I was. And that was my most discouraging years of elementary school. But the other teachers, they treated me as the person I could become, not who I was. And if you walked in here today, or if you're watching online, and you're focused on what is and not what can become, you're probably discouraged. If you're maybe focused on a kid that's gone wayward and you're focused on where they are, where your kids are, where your kid is versus what they can become, you're going to be discouraged. Maybe you're focused on your marriage for what it is versus what God could help it become, and you're going to be discouraged if you're focused on what is. Maybe you're focused on a job or career and what is and not what it can become. Or a boss, you're focused on what that he or she is versus what they could become. Or even your own spiritual life, you're focused on what is right now versus what it could become. God wants us to be hopeful and future focused. And so this is so important that we refocus on the future. And for me, when I'm looking at the dumb failures of my past, when I look at some of the circumstances that happened to me that were unfavorable, yeah, it's discouraging. It tears you down. But that's why we're to be future focused. I love Floyd Campbell. I told the first service, I don't know who Floyd Campbell is. I just saw this quote. I love good quotes. No one came up to me after first service and told me who he is. Maybe some in second service will. Hopefully he's not a Satan worshiper or something like that. I mean, hopefully this is a good guy. But I love what he said. He said, even though there are days I wish I could change some things that happened in the past, there's a reason the rear view mirror is so small and the windshield is so big. Where you're headed is more important than what you have left behind. Nobody does well looking and driving in the rearview mirror. And no one lives that well looking in the rearview mirror either. We're meant to look forward. And when people are future focused, and when we're future focused, then hope begins to rise and hope begins to increase. I'm share this verse that Jesus gave us the example of someone that looked at this ragtag group of disciples. They weren't the cream of the crop. They weren't the best of the best. But he wanted to show what they could become. He wasn't focused on where he met them, where he encountered them. He was focused on what they could become, not what they were. And in Mark chapter 1, verse 16, it says, as he was going along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become. I'll make you become fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and they followed him. He said, follow me and I will make you become. Jesus was not focused on what they were at that time. He was focused on what they could become. And he had bigger plans for them than fishing. Probably a good thing, because I've been thinking about this too. If you've read the Gospels and you read about the disciples and when they were fishing, I don't even know if they're that good. Every time I come across the disciples, they're not catching anything. I mean, they can't even make up a story and fabricate that it was this big because they didn't catch anything that they could make bigger. So I'm kind of wondering, were they even that good? Was Jesus maybe rescuing them from something they weren't very good at? And he's like, I know you love to fish, but every time I come across you, I have to tell you, throw your net on the other side because you guys aren't very good at this. We know this. We know that they were just ordinary guys. They were unschooled. And Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, which is the story of how the church was launched, he describes the disciples with how the people thought of them. Not his own words, but how the people thought of them, that they noticed that they were unschooled, ordinary guys. But Jesus wasn't focused on what they were. He was focused on what they could become, and he used them to help change the world. He refocused them on the future. And all through the scriptures you see this. Time after time, you see God engaging with people where they were, but taking them somewhere farther of what they could be. We see Jonah. He ran from God. Some of us, we've ran from God. Maybe you're running from God today. Jonah ran from God. God used Jonah to change a whole city to come to faith in him. We see Moses, and we hear the great stories of him, but the first 2/3 of his life, the first 80 years, there was no good resume to write about Moses. I mean, the most you could say about him, that he murdered someone, and he hadn't accomplished anything. But God used Moses, who had a speech impediment and stuttered. He used him to bring 2 million Jews out of the bondage of captivity and slavery of the Egyptians. Time after time, God uses different people. We see that God uses Paul. Paul, who has persecuted the church, who killed Christians, the first part of his life, became the man that wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. God looked for people for not what they were. He saw them for what they could be. He looked at their future, and he wants us to do the same. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become." Good news for us today is this. This isn't a God that doesn't have the power to do that in us today. The same Jesus, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he did in the past, he can do in the future. If he can change their lives, he can change our lives. If he has a great future for them, he can have a great future for us. No matter what we've been through, I'd say it this way: Jesus died for you for what was and what has been, so you can become what will be. God has a plan for you to become more than you even have dreams or imagine for yourself. God's dreams for you are bigger than your dreams. This guy, Howard Hendricks, you've heard me quote him a few times. There's a famous quote I've said many times from a book that I've read where he said, "Discouragement is the anesthetic that the devil uses on a person right before he reaches in and carves out their heart." Howard Hendricks, maybe one of the greatest theologians of the 21st century, who had an impact on some of the greatest preachers and authors of the 21st century. Tony Evans, Dr. David Jeremiah, Chuck Swindoll. These were his students and others that would go on to write, millions of copies of books, would preach to millions of people. He was a great professor, a great teacher. And what changed for him? Where did this come from? Well, it didn't come because he started off well in life. He came from a very broken home early in his life. His parents split. He was raised by his grandmother. He was told in the 5th grade, along with he and his buddies, that they were the worst kids in the school and that they would end up in prison one day. That's what their 5th grade teacher told him. And he said she was right on 3 of 4. 3 of his buddies that she was talking about went on to spend time in prison. But something changed for Howard Hendricks, because 5th grade wasn't the end. He had 6th grade, and he encountered Miss No. Not N-O, no, but N-O-E, no. He encountered Miss No. He said, "Miss No changed my life." Because on the first day of school, and kids, we have these files. They have files on us that go from grade to grade. I'm sure my file was, probably that thick. But it goes with us from grade to grade. And he got to 6th grade on the first day of school, and they're going through roll call, and Miss No says to Howard, she says, "I've heard a lot about you." And he immediately thought, "I'm sunk. Everything that's been said about me in my past, it's going to be another one of those years." But that wasn't the end of her sentence. She said, "I've heard a lot about you, but I don't believe a word of it." And he said something clicked within him that day, because for the first time in his life, he had someone that believed in him. Someone that believed in him. There is power. There is power when someone believes in you. Whether it's a parent, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coach, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a friend, when you have someone that believes in you more than you believe in yourself, there is power in that. There's even greater power, and we have a God, when we come to the understanding, who believes in us more than we believe in ourselves, who has greater plans for us than we have for ourselves. He had for the first time in his life, Miss No was that person that helped him understand that there was something out there for him, that there was a future for him. And he began to work so hard for Miss No. He would do anything. He worked hard on his assignments. He gave his very best. He said, "I would have run through a brick wall for Miss No, because she was the person who believed in me for the first time." Well, this is the thing. He began to ask this question the rest of his life. Instead of looking at things the way that they were, as a great professor and as a great teacher, as a great theologian, he began to ask this question, and he spent his life asking this question: what can this become? Or what can this person become? And when he began to focus on what people could become and what his students could become, it began to change their life. And it began to give them a brighter future. Because when you start focusing on this, what can this become versus what it is, your future gets brighter. When you begin to focus on the future of what can this become, it changes everything. When you begin to say as a student, what can this become versus what this student is, it makes a brighter future for that student. When you begin to look at your business and say, what can this become versus what it is, it can change the future of a business. When you begin to look at your own life and say, what can this become versus what it is, it brings a brighter future. When you look at your marriage, and instead of focusing on what it is, you begin to focus on what it can become, and you become future focused. It can change everything. People with high hopes are future focused. I was doing some counseling. It's not my favorite thing to do. If you want to get screwed up, just come to me for counseling. I can make it all worse. We got professionals that do that. But part of the nature of my job, it just happens sometimes. And so I was counseling a couple. And I asked, and I usually learn more from them than they do from me, and I wrote this down after they left because I thought, man, this is powerful. And I was asking the guy, I said, how's it work for you and what gives you hope? And he said, what gives me hope is that she looked beyond my past and saw my potential. She overlooked my past and saw and sees my potential. And friends, if we would do that, if we would do that for people around us, if people would do that for us, and if we would look beyond their past and look to what their future could be, what God would want to do, because we're all created in the image of God. We're all created in His image, and He wants all of us to do great things through each one of us, each and every one of us. If we could see that we're made in God's image, that every one of you is made in God's image, and God wants to do great things through your life, what could people become if we begin to ask what could happen with this, if we began to get refocused on the future? Instead of being past focused, if we are future focused. Because when we're past focused, it's like driving in reverse. And the only thing you're going to do driving in reverse is you're going to have wrecks. It's not going to go well. And if you're focused on your spouse and what they are and what they've used to be, and you stay there, you're just driving in reverse. If you're focused on your kids and where they are now or what they have been, you're just driving in reverse. And no one drives well in life driving in reverse. We're called to be future focused. That doesn't mean that there's not tough love at times. That doesn't mean that there's not things that we do. But I do want to just share with you this morning, because some of you like to take notes. You've been thinking, where are we doing notes? This is where we do notes. Some of you could care less about the notes, but for those of you who love notes, here's your 3 benefits of being future focused. The first one is this: passion replaces apathy and discouragement. When we begin to look in the future and not the past, and we begin to get a God-sized future focus, discouragement and apathy seem to disappear. Most of us started with passion. Our marriages started with passion. New Christians start with passion. A new church starts with passion. New jobs or a new career usually starts with passion. But then over time we kind of get beat up. When I started my freshman year of college playing football, everyone goes around and said, man, what a loser you are. I don't talk about my high school days. We won a lot in high school. But people resonate more with our losses than they do our wins. You don't want to hear my glory stories. So let's go to my college. 5 wins, 35 losses in 4 years. Incredible career. And my freshman year, about halfway through, we were new to this team, and so we were getting better each week, and we started getting filled with hope. And our new middle linebacker was a freshman from New Mexico. His name was Kenny Keeler. He'd had a couple good games. He would go on to be a first-team all-conference his sophomore year. And we only won 1 game at this point, but he steps in, and every Friday we had a players-only meeting without the coaches after practice on Friday before we played on Saturday. And Kenny got up and he gave this amazing rah-rah speech. He talked about how when he played in New Mexico, they didn't lose, they won a state championship, and everyone was getting all excited, and we're like, yes. And then the last thing he said was, I'm not used to losing. And a senior in the back, and I'll just call him by his first name, was sipping a Coke, and he said, get used to it. Talk about a downer. I mean, we were up here, and then all of a sudden, we went on to lose. We got one more game in there. But then they hired a new head coach, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But when we get a future and we get a hope, things begin to change. Paul, he began to look future focused. Paul had a checkered past. He persecuted the church. He killed Christians. He was the most anti-Christian that you could be, the most anti-Jesus that you could be. But Jesus saw, hey, if I get this guy, it's going to change the world. He goes on to write 2/3 of the New Testament. And one of my favorite verses is when he says, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. One thing I do, I put the past in the past. I quit driving in reverse. I quit looking in my rearview mirror. If there's one thing I know that's going to bring me down, it's going to discourage me. It's going to be look at what I used to be. But now I'm going to focus on what God has for me, what He has in my front windshield, ahead of me. I'm going to focus on not what He has, what's behind me, but what God has ahead of me. One thing I do. The second thing is about being future focused is you experience great comebacks. We can't experience great comebacks if we're not future focused. Coach Redwine took over my sophomore year of college, 26-year-old first-time head coach. He had players older than him. And he started that year off, and his first speech to us was, we can't control this, we can't control this, we can't control this, and we can't control this. It's all out of our control. But what we can control is we can work harder than anyone else. And we're going to work harder than anyone else. And we began to work, and we bought into it, and we believed. And you would think because of how hard we worked that's our sophomore year. We were 8-2. We were 0-10. But we were filled with hope. It was my favorite year. The year that we didn't win a game was my favorite year because we were hopeful about our future. Because we'd lost 7 games by less than 4 points. 6 of those teams were ranked in the top 20. And so we were excited. We were just like, we just got to get over this hump. Junior year, we went to amazing 1-9. 1 win, 9 losses. In my senior year, we blew it out of the water. 2 wins, 8 losses. Thus, I got my 5 wins, 35 losses. Then they got rid of me and they went 6-3-1. In large part because they had a young coach who stayed future focused and who continued to point to the future, that better days are ahead. And they went on and experienced a great comeback. He would go on a couple years later. I got to do a graduate assistant 1 year with him when we went 8-2, and that was a fun year. But his last year in 2000, they went 11-2. They went to the national championship game. They lost, but they went to the national championship game. You never experience comebacks like that if you're focused on the past. And if you're having the attitude, it's always going to be this way. Get used to it. People that raise their hope levels are future focused. They believe that God has better days ahead. And it fuels us. The last one is this. You're set to dream. You're set free to dream. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans I have for you. This is one of our favorite verses, right? I mean, anybody, this is posted up somewhere in maybe in your office or on your computer. This is this is plaques are made of this. We love this verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And we read that and we think, that sounds so good. But the context of when this is written is real important. This wasn't written when they were on the mountaintop. God had this written when they were in their darkest hour. Other than Jesus' death on that Friday, this was the time of the darkest hour for the children of Israel. Because they were thrown into captivity. They were abandoned to another country and a foreign dictator. They were under Babylonian rule. They were far from their homeland. And they were living under a dictatorship. And it's in the middle of this, when everything, their darkest hour, that God says, I know my plans for you. It'd be 70 years before He would bring them home. But this was the promise He gave them. I know my plans for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. So it begs the question, what do we do when we're in the valley? What do we do when the promise is far off and we can't see it and we don't know when it's coming? God says, trust me. It may not look like it. Things may look bleak. But I know the plans I have for you. Plans for a hope and a future. And so you go like, okay, I can live for that. I'm excited about that, but it's a long way off. I don't even see it. They didn't even see it. So how do you live when you're going through it? How do you live when you're in exile? How do you live when you're far from home? How do you live when your circumstances are at their worst? Well, he tells us in the rest of the chapter, verse 4. God said, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Seek the prosperity and the peace of this foreign king, this foreign dictator. You're in bondage. You're their subjects. But I'm telling you, seek their peace and prosperity of this city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. How do we live when we're in exile? How do we live when we're going through it? How do you live when maybe you feel like your marriage is in exile? You're not feeling very hopeful about its future. How are you to live? You're to pray for the peace and prosperity of your spouse. You're to pray that things would go well for them. You're to serve them to the best of your ability. You're there to do unto them as you'd want done unto you. And you're, instead of focusing on where they're all missing it, where they're doing it all wrong, and harping on how they can do better, what if you change your approach? Because that approach isn't working anyway. What if you change your approach and said, instead of tearing them down, instead of telling them how they're doing it all wrong, I'm going to seek peace in our home. I'm going to seek to do well for them and help them be successful. I'm going to help them achieve their dreams, and I'm going to pray for them. What if you did that? What if you looked at them for the future that God has for them, not where they are now? What if you have you're in a bad work environment and you got a bad boss? How do you live when you're in that situation? Seek the peace and prosperity of that business, of that school, of that in work environment. Seek their betterment, because if they get better, it gets better. It's better for you. If they succeed, the business succeeds or the school succeeds. Pray that they would prosper. And Jesus himself said, pray for your enemies. Don't return bad and evil for evil, but pray for those who persecute you. Pray for those who do you wrong. Pray a blessing on them. Pray for those who have, because when you pray for them, and if they get better, you get better. And if you seek their peace and prosperity, it gets better for you. Maybe you have a child that's just gone rogue, rebelled, left the family. I'm not saying there's not boundaries that need to be in place, but pray for them. Look at what they can be, not what they are now. Because if you focus on what something is right now, it will discourage you. It'll leave you feeling hopeless. But if you focus on, hey, with God, all things are possible. If he can raise Christ from the dead, he can raise this situation from the dead. He can raise a marriage that is dead, and he can bring it back to life. Friends, I've watched God do it. I've seen marriages that were dead. I've seen marriages that were divorced, and I've seen God bring that couple back together. Does it happen every time? No, it doesn't. Because it takes two. It's not just one. So how do you live with your ex? How do you live in exile with the person who hurt you, betrayed you, who wronged you? Seek your best to live at peace with them, to seek their prosperity, to seek their best, to pray for them, to pray that it goes well for them. God sees that. And when you begin to look at people for the way God sees them, that God has a future and a hope for them, God loves all of us equally. I want to share that news with you today. He doesn't play favorites. There's not anybody that says, I just like you a little bit better. Kent, now that's my guy. It's not how he does it. He loves every single one of us the same. He wishes well for each and every one of us. He seeks our betterment. He wants to be our Savior. He wants everyone to come to a relationship with Christ. He wants you. He wants me, but he wants us equally. So we need to be in mind, even those people that oppose us, that wronged us, that hurt us, he wants good for them. And that can be hard. But following Jesus isn't always easy. And what Jesus did for us on the cross certainly wasn't easy. While we were still sinners, he died for us. While we were still spitting in his face, he went to the cross for us. He bore our penalty of death. He bore our penalty of shame. He took it upon himself. Seek the peace and prosperity. Remember this guy? It brings a smile to your face. If you're new with us today, let me just tell you quickly who this guy is. Pastor Bones. Pastor Bones was coming up this May 6th, died age 91 last year. Actually, we lost a couple of giants in our church last year. Larry Doskasil, April 21st, died last year. Those who know Larry Doskasil and Bones Nay, total polar different personalities. You couldn't ask for people to be any more different than what they were. But you know two things that united them. One was their faith in Jesus Christ and their love for the church. But the second thing is they went about it different ways, but they were both future focused. They were future focused. And it's not because they had great starts. They both didn't come from great starts. I'm just sharing Pastor Bones' story today. Pastor Bones was born into an unwanted pregnancy, abandoned early on. Just a few days, he was adopted by some wonderful parents. So he didn't have the greatest start in life. And then those parents named him Merle, strike two. I mean, sorry if you have the name Merle, if you're anybody here watching, but strike two. So, I mean, he loved his nickname Bones. Cindy, his daughter's out laughing with me, so I didn't say anything. He didn't like his name. Yeah, he didn't like his name, so that was strike two. He gets to the middle of his elementary school years, and they had one of those meetings, kind of the meeting they had after my first year of kindergarten. There's like 3 counselors, a principal, a psychologist, and all these people saying, this kid needs help. Bones needed help. Long before they diagnosed what this was, he had dyslexia. But dyslexia was kind of a diagnosis that you're dumb. They didn't really have a thing for it, a treatment or whatever, or how to help you for it. So he sat outside of an office and overheard the experts say about him, Merle will never learn like other children learn. He'll never be like other kids. And something within, I believe there's something that God puts in him before we come to him. There's something clicked in him that said, watch me. Watch me. And he began to focus on a future. And he began to say, what could I be? What could this be? Instead of what they're saying I am and what people say I am, what could I be? What could I become? He would go on to have a great athletic career. He'd be the president of his high school in Wichita. There's just great things. Now, we have setbacks. Maybe the success went a little bit to his head, and he went on to Northwestern on a full-ride scholarship, was flunked out his freshman year. And he had to refocus on his future with the help of the Marine Corps. Thank the Lord for the Marine Corps. Some of us need tough love sometimes to help us refocus our future. And the Marine Corps helped him refocus his future. And he began to have a path and to see a way forward. When I came into Bones' life, it was near the end of his life. It was the last 7 years of his life. And when I met Pastor Bones, he had just lost his son to cancer. His adult, Cindy's brother. A couple years ago, he lost his wife of 66 years. But you know what I noticed in Pastor Bones? He never stopped being future focused. And he never stopped being focused on others. Even when he couldn't come to church anymore because he just didn't have the strength and couldn't do it anymore. You know what he did? He starts a Bible study in Samaritans over there on 30th, because he was focused on the future and he was focused on others. And if you just know this is the poster child of hope. But it wasn't because everything went well in his life and because everything good thing happened. It's like that third song that we sang today. What he did do is he trusted in a good father. And at age 47 was the turning point, the biggest turning point of his life. He had reached the pinnacle. It was his dream job, assistant athletic director for Kansas State University. He had achieved the place that he'd always hoped to be, but 2 years later was fired unceremoniously. And Cindy told me it was more devastating than we'll ever know. His dreams, his hopes had been dashed. Everything he'd worked for was gone. And a young pastor in Wichita, Kansas, began to ask Bones, how you doing? How you doing? How's your spiritual life? And you've heard him tell this if you know him. He'd say, I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready. He said, I don't know what I was getting ready for, but I just was tired of him asking that kind of question, how's my spiritual life? It made me uncomfortable, so I was like, I'm getting ready. And one of those times he said, hey, you can get ready all you want, but there'll never be anything that you can do to earn God's love, to deserve God's love. You simply have to receive God's love as a gift and give your life to Jesus Christ. And at age 47 years old, Pastor Bones gave his heart and his life to Jesus Christ. And we got to see the new Bones. We got to see the man that went on to have 8 years as the head of the state of Kansas Fellowship of Christian Athletes. We got to see the hoorah guy for Hutchinson High School and has, 6 or 7 rings because he was along for the state championships. And I got to witness him. He didn't do it every time, but I got to witness him on that Thursday night a couple times when they're all standing up, hoorah and cheering, and he's right there. He's just give it to me. Man, we miss Bones. But the message we need to receive from his life is that he was future focused. And he was future focused on what God had for him. It didn't matter what was in his past. What mattered was he believed that God had a future